Doug, today I'd like to talk about something that's been in the news a lot with all the protests and riots that have been happening around the country. There have been some specific examples of individuals who were seem to have been acting in self-defense. Seems in some cases very, very clear, and yet the state, the district attorneys or whatever in that location were really going after him, really throwing the book at him. And there's the Kyle Rittenhouse example, a 17-year-old in Kenosha. Jake Gardner, who was the Omaha bar owner, who ended up killing himself when he was charged. And then there was that St. Louis couple. Remember, the Black Lives Matter protest came down their private drive, and they were apparently terrified, came out of the house with an AR-15 trying to keep people off of their property. I thought that the right to self-defense was sort of well understood, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. So what's your take on these events as part of a larger trend? What's the history and the real rights around self-defense?
Well, uh, I'm extremely pro self-defense. It's actually basic to being a human. It's actually basic to a civilized society. I've taken several combat gun courses in my life. One that lasted, how long did that one last? About 3 days. So, I'm pretty familiar with all kinds of weapons, own quite a few of them. I like to shoot. Don't like to hunt, incidentally, because I just don't like to kill things, to be honest. But that said, I do have lots of guns and like to shoot them. So it's funny how the world has changed just in my lifetime. Give you an example. When I was 17, I flew from Chicago to Washington, D.C. And I carried with me my pistol. It was a 22 Woodsman and a rifle, and just got on the plane with them. Here I am, a 17-year-old kid. I obviously have the pistol and the rifle. I mean, there they are. Put them in the overhead compartment above me. Nobody said a word. And I flew back the same way a month later. Nobody said a word. And things were like that in those days. It wasn't a hysterical society. Of course, that was before all these school shootings started, which are also indicative of something else crazy in society. Most of those kids, almost all of them, were on some type of, were either on or just coming off of some type of psychiatric drug. But they blamed the guns, not the individual. But
Right.
It's funny. So that's an example of what it was like in 1963. Commercial airliner, 17-year-old kid. That was an open view. But when I went to school in Switzerland in 1967, wish I'd gone with these guys, but I had other things that I was doing at the time. A couple of friends bought a Volkswagen with the idea, which they did, of driving it from Geneva to Kabul, Afghanistan. But they also, in a Swiss gun shop, they bought a 380 Beretta because they figured it'd be good to have some heat because there are crazy people in that part of the world. And, they crossed all those borders in their VW with the Beretta in the car and didn't think twice about it. Now, how about that? And that's as late as 1967. But then things started changing a lot. And it's really been all downhill. But it's actually been going downhill. The right to self-defense and to own guns, probably since the 1930s. Before the 1930s, you could own anything. In the US, you could own any kind of gun. You could own a belt-fed automatic weapon. Of course, you still can today.
Purpose.
You have to apply for a class 3 firearms license and they're available. You can do that. You have to jump through hoops, and you have to pay an annual fee of about $500 and so forth. But yeah, you can still do that. But they watch you, so it's part of the general diminution of freedom. Because if you don't have the right to defend yourself, you really don't have a right to do anything. You're in effect, you're like a serf.
Mm. That's an interesting the way you put it. I was just trying to do a little research on the history of the right for self-defense and English common law, and I didn't get that far with it, but I got as far as basically talking about that. I think it was Henry VIII, talking about essentially how it was defined self-defense. You could, for instance, kill somebody who was trying to rob you or steal some of your things, but you couldn't necessarily kill them if they were trying to just hurt you. And it was because if you were acting for the benefit of the sovereign, of the king, then you were ridding the country essentially of a thief, and that's okay. But if it's just to protect your person, which is in that where you have a king, is where you are not sovereign, where you have a sovereign, essentially your right to live was not worth defending. And you could be pardoned essentially by the king or by a minister, but it wasn't automatic. I mean, if it wasn't for the benefit of the sovereign, you couldn't actually do anything.
Yeah, that's where this ridiculous concept of the state can license you to kill, like James Bond.
Right.
I see it as a matter of personal responsibility. Most people don't realize that it's talking about the way things were even back in the 60s. But if you read Sherlock Holmes stories, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, you find that Sherlock used to amuse himself in his quarters on Baker Street by shooting his pistol indoors at a target above the mantelpiece.
Right.
Nobody thought twice about things like that in those days. Of course, in those days, the drugs that he took, which did not in any way diminish his mental or physical powers, they're all illegal today. Sherlock would be doing 10 to 20 for drugs that he did in the privacy of his own home, forgetting about shooting a gun in his own home. And actually, this thing about the illegalization of self-defense and firearms in particular, that trend accelerated with the insane war on drugs, which itself started with the Harrison Act after World War I, really, but that was the same time that Prohibition came in. That was the first real war on drugs. The drug happened to be alcohol. And when they illegalized alcohol and then other drugs, it went underground. So instead of being able to buy these things at your local corner grocery store or drugstore, if you would, which you used to be able to do, there was no violence about it. I mean, addiction was a problem for a few people who had psychological aberrations that, needed to heal their pain with drugs. That's fine. I guess even Sherlock Holmes might have been one of those. But once it went underground and people still wanted drugs, it became very profitable. It wasn't like selling cornflakes anymore, which it used to be. It became a really, really profitable area. And since it was illegal, all kinds of criminal gangs got involved in it, and then they fight for their territory, guns being, a very effective way of doing that. So it was the war on drugs, starting with alcohol prohibition, that actually led or accelerated this thing about not being able to have guns to defend yourself. So it really goes a lot deeper than just the prohibition of guns themselves. I mean, everything the state does in order to supposedly improve things, there are always knock-on effects that make things worse. And doesn't make, I mean, illegalizing drugs was supposed to make society safer. It didn't. It made it much more dangerous. And that led to the gun thing, which made it much more dangerous again. It's just, even going back to ancient times, a primary distinction between a free man and a slave was the right to arm yourself. Slaves were totally and absolutely prohibited from any means of self-defense. So if people had a grip on history, they'd realize that the state today is treating them the way slaves used to be treated. And the whole thing is, it's ridiculous from all kinds of points of view, not having easily obtainable weapons. You should be able to buy them the way you buy their tools. You should be able to buy them the way you buy a hammer or a hoe at the drugstore, at the hardware store. It's said that when you need a cop, help is only minutes away. But there are such things as home invasions, which are an increasingly popular type of crime, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For all kinds of reasons. And so what are you going to do if you're suffering a home invasion? Engage in hand-to-hand combat with armed thugs in your house in your pajamas? That's not a formula for a successful. You've got to be armed.
And there was one thing that I think that two things. As all of this, the protests and riots have occurred over the summer, it's really scared a lot of people. And so you have a huge number of new gun owners who, in fact, I had lunch with someone the other day who had never owned a gun in his life. But he bought 2 guns, a few months ago. And I asked like, well, what motivated you to do it? He goes, well, just all that's happening. I mean, I just feel like I should have something, it's like, I feel like the target's gonna be on my back.
Was he a liberal or a conservative? This particular
he is a liberal. Yep. He's a liberal. Yeah.
Did it make him feel hypocritical? Being anti-gun, I suppose.
Well, he wasn't really anti-gun. His view wasn't really anti-gun. It was just like, why would I need it? What good would it do me? Because we fortunately, most of my life, it's been very safe, very comfortable. You don't have to worry about these kinds of things. But it's people have been scared straight a little bit recently, and so it's caused a lot of interest in guns. And also, I think at the same time, people have been shocked to see that you could actually carry an AR-15 on the street legally. Like, I just think people don't even understand these laws. The people were shocked when, there were protesters in Michigan protesting the lockdowns who showed up to the state capitol armed. And they're like, I can't believe the cops are tolerating this, because they just don't understand, that it's not that, like, it is, within the law to carry guns, and they aren't going to suddenly and unexpectedly, bite you. They're tools.
I'd be very happy if many more people carried guns, concealed or unconcealed. It would make for a safer society, because when you realize that your life is a danger if you assault somebody, you're going to want to think twice before assaulting somebody, because you don't know, to what degree you're going to push this other guy. I mean, I live in the People's Republic of Aspen during the summer, and it's full of liberals, and but I have a couple friends that carry, and I'm always happy when they're around, because you never know when there's some maniac that's going to start shooting. Probably some maniac, as with most of these shootings, that is getting on or getting off of some type of dangerous psychiatric drug. And I think they're all basically psychiatric. They're all dangerous to start with. But The question is, this leads us back to this coming election. If the Democrats are elected, almost all, in fact, I guess all of the Democratic candidates, or the Democratic Party, if you listen to the debate between their candidates, these people are they're rabidly anti-gun. And like Biden said, they're going to come and take them away. I don't think they'll do that right away, because that's like asking for a civil war.
Right. That's a red line for many, many people. I mean, but I think you mentioned this a couple of days ago. They could inch their way into it. They just make things more difficult, and they wear you down over time. And you feel like you're making small compromises, and then all of a sudden you have a disarmed populace.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much the way you trap a herd of hogs. They're very wily animals. You can't easily trap hogs. So the way they do it, incidentally, is they put some food out in an area, and the hogs are suspicious, but after a while they come and eat the food and come back every day. It's easy. It makes sense for them. And then you put up a fence on one side, and they look at it. It's okay. Then keep feeding. Put up a fence on the other side. Put up a fence on all four sides with a gate, and there they are. They're trapped on one day, and that's the way. That's the way these people do it. With they treat human beings very much the way humans treat hogs. So it's yeah, you're right. It will be gradual, and basically gun culture has gone away in the U.S. Not many. I mean, it used to be that back in the days when they advertised BB guns in comic books, and all the kids wanted, and most of us had BB guns when we were just little kids, and then it moved, but now that doesn't happen anymore. Kids aren't familiar with guns.
Yeah, especially, I mean, I think that really depends upon exactly where you grow up, but certainly it's far less prevalent than it was when I was a kid, even, just between myself and my son, that 30-year difference, there's a big difference. Although, my son definitely had a BB gun and definitely shot at 22, pretty young, and he had some of that experience, but yeah, I wonder, I mean, how do you change the culture? How did it happen so that the guns and weapons were not considered dangerous or risky or scary to the extent where someone could travel across, international borders from Switzerland, to Afghanistan, and then you could fly from Chicago to DC. I'm not surprised about that in the U.S., but I mean, when you tell me you can also do that internationally, it surprises me. And I just how do you go from that to where now it's, people are just, it scares them. I mean, if someone has a pocket knife on them, I think, that people are like, why would you have a knife with you?
Yeah, they go wild. I mean, it's funny. People never question things like the Indiana Jones movies, the first one in particular. So this was supposed to have taken place in the mid-30s. And, Indy went everywhere with his gun.
Yep.
And his whip, of course. And nobody thought twice. Well, that was a fact in those days. So it's the growth of the state. It really is the growth of the state. I mean, look, the income tax didn't exist before World War I. Most of these agencies, almost all of these agencies, didn't exist, but they kept growing up, and there's more of them all the time, and more taxes all the time, more regulations all the time. The question is where is society as a whole going to go? Are we going to end up in a police state of some type? And will the police state be more like Orwell's 1984, or more like Huxley's Brave New World? Actually, it's going to be the worst elements of both of them.
But some people everyone should read those books. I should be required reading, especially for this time. I always imagined it'd be more like Brave New World. That's the way I imagined it was going. but I've really in the last 6 months started to think otherwise. And can you just summarize for people what those two versions of the future looked like in those books?
Yeah, well, in Orwell's 1984, The World of Big Brother, it's like the Soviet Union used to be, except on steroids, where you, the permission from the state and the militarization of society and eternal war, horrible. But Huxley's Brave New World is also total state control, where they, from birth, or before birth actually, classify all people into A, B, C, or D groups, I believe it was. And the smart ones run society, and the ones on the bottom basically, clean the toilets. And it's very orderly because everybody's on drugs, making them basically automatons. So we're getting elements of both, actually.
Yeah, the thing I always remembered from, from that was that people would go on a Soma vacation. They would just, and they feel like they needed to, they wanted to take a break from their normal life. They would take a drug that would basically, put them in an alternate universe essentially for, for a week or a couple of weeks. And, while they were just laying there essentially, and then they would come back, feeling, more up to their normal way of life or whatever. But the 1984 thing is what I always thought it would be something more like that. We would just be numbed into compliance, voluntary compliance. We would just go along with what the state was doing. That's what I imagined. But you see all this more 1984-esque stuff recently, where the efforts to distort the language, to distort, which then leads to the distortion of your thinking. And then just to make it so that certain words have to be banished from the vocabulary, and the history has to be pushed down some memory hole as if it didn't occur. It's a...
Yeah, and the state really is showing its fangs and becoming brutal in many places. In these during this COVID hysteria, the lockdowns are just draconian. One of the worst in the world is in the province of Victoria in Australia, which is around Melbourne. I mean, it really is 1984 there.
It's frightening. I think it is the worst in the world. I think they've been under lockdown longer than Wuhan was.
Now, the kind of people that want to go to work for the government are using this as a perfect excuse to do what they want as far as controlling their fellow citizens is concerned. And is it going to get better? I just don't see how.
Well, one of the things that started to worry me, as I mentioned earlier, that worried me the most in all these trends, that I felt like mostly this was going to be an economic, this would be the economic reckoning we've been expecting for a while. That's what I thought that this COVID thing would be the catalyst for. But you see these things that are deeper than that, where like you said, the hysteria around, some of the state actions, but in particular, it's the actions of some of these prosecutors in the way that they've, rioters and looters, not pressing charges, people trying to defend themselves. I mean, really throwing the book at them. I mean, everything you can imagine.
You're actually not allowed to defend yourself. I mean, there's a joke in the gun community that if somebody is, attacking your house, invading your house, after you shoot them, you better drag them inside, because it'll increase the odds that you'll be prosecuted. But here, right now, I'm talking to you from my farm in Uruguay, and in Uruguay, you're allowed to have 3 guns, so it's not draconian. Shouldn't be any laws at all about that. But if you use one of your guns to defend yourself, actually, it better not even be in your own house. If you shoot somebody, you better wait until he's in your bedroom. I mean, so it's like this all over the world. It's really, really quite bad.
But it's like, it seems, I guess what wasn't so obvious to me until now is how much uh, how much the prosecutors would just bend to the mob, because what happened if you take the example of the guy in the Omaha bar owner. The DA reviewed the case and decided not to press charges. Had all the film evidence. And I'll link to a video where you can see the DA's presentation, where he walks through all of the facts and why he's saying, this looks like self-defense, so no, I'm not going to proceed. And then over the subsequent days, there's there's protesters outside of his house, at which point he appoints a special prosecutor, a former U.S. attorney, who then convened a grand jury and announced these charges against the guy. And it just that I didn't think that the mob. I just thought the law would be. I guess assumed naively that this would stop with local prosecutors and mayors who had to really deal with it, taking these problems out of the abstract and putting them in the real world. And people don't want this stuff in their neighborhood. You got to think the prosecutors are just not going to tolerate it.
Well, prosecutors are basically taking a step to a higher position in the political pecking order. And to show that they're worthy, they've got to put a lot of people in jail. We've got over 2 million people in jail, and it's largely because of this. The type of people that become prosecutors, recognizing that it's a step to becoming the mayor, and then a step to becoming a senator and whatever. But I've written 2 novels with John Hunt, Speculator and Drug Lord, but the third one, which is actually, I think, going to be the best and very interesting and is germane to what we're talking about right now, is called Assassin, and it's going to be out the first week in October. And it's called Assassin because our hero, Charles Knight, after having 2 fortunes stolen from him by the state, just gets pissed off and decides that some people just need killing. And that shocks most people when they hear that, especially when it's put in the frame of a political context. But at the same time, every sophomore in college, in philosophy class, has to bring up the question, well, if it's wrong to kill somebody, would you have killed Hitler? Okay, sure. Would you have killed Hitler when he was a baby? How about when he was a teenager? It's so this book, Assassin, deals with it's a morality tale as much as anything else. Talks about various techniques of political assassination, which is kind of an interesting study in itself. But it talks about the morale and the history of political assassinations. But mainly, it's about the morality of killing people in general. Actually, when is it right and when is it wrong to kill another person? People don't confront that. They say, let the courts, let the laws take care of it. But no, it's a very individual decision that you have to make when your life is in danger, or somebody else's life is in danger, or maybe other circumstances besides.
Right. Well, and the law is supposed to be based upon the moral philosophy of its citizens. It's supposed to fundamentally represent that. So just saying, well, it's a legal matter, I think is a mistake. I think if people,
it's shrugging off your personal responsibilities.
Exactly.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that things the way they are, a lot of Americans are going to want to totally illegalize guns. And they don't realize that in countries like Mexico, guns are like totally illegal in Mexico. But just in the last 20 years, I was just looking at a statistic that there are, let me see if I can remember these numbers correctly. In the last 20 years, about 240,000 Mexicans met violent deaths, most of them from guns, in a country where guns are illegal, in addition to 80,000 more having disappeared. And of the bodies, I'm remembering that, I think I'm accurate, that the police have recovered, about 40,000 of the bodies can't even be identified. So you got to ask yourself, would there be more or less of these murders in Mexico if guns were legal? And I'd say there would be a lot less, because people could defend themselves. And now you can't. It's just the real hardened criminals that have guns in Mexico, and they use them.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think a lot, there's one of the, we're talking about millennials and how they misunderstand, the way the human interactions, that if they're not regulated by some, overlord or some parent, essentially, in this case, it's the state, that, people will be bad, they'll do bad things. But, and I reminded them at dinner, they're very focused on racial issues today. So I said, well, in the segregationist South, do you think that everyone there, every business owner, was racist? Like, no, I don't think everyone could have been. I mean, there were certainly some, but some probably weren't. And so do you think then that would be, there's probably some business owners that it would have been better for them, and in their minds better for their customers, if they didn't force, the blacks to sit on one side of the restaurant and the whites to sit on the other. It would have been better for them. The problem is they would have gone to jail. The state imposed these things. It imposed these racist practices. And I think that's what people don't understand. It wasn't that the people necessarily were bad. It's that the state required people to be not just racist in thought, but racist in deed.
You're absolutely correct, because I've spent a lot of time in the South, and the average Southerner, I mean, this has actually changed in some ways over the years with the laws and the fact that people are forced to do things and so forth. But the average white Southerner got along fine with the average black Southerner. It was, they were just part of each other's landscape. And talking about this, that people rely on the state to do the right thing and so forth. After the Nazis illegalized gun possession in Germany, it might have been nice if, when the Gestapo knocked on the door at 3:00 in the morning, or the KGB in Russia, which actually was much more dangerous and draconian than the Gestapo even was, if they'd been, greeted with a couple of rounds from a gun. But just because they were state employees, they were sacrosanct. You couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
So this whole thing goes to much deeper levels than just legalizing or not illegalizing guns. I mean, it's a whole philosophical context that's worth talking about.
Well, and the root of that is probably education, which is another topic I want to make sure that we talk about at some point, because it does seem that if you were to basically look at the bottom, the big root problem that is the problem in our culture, where we don't have a shared culture, we certainly don't have most people don't operate with a real moral compass. They're operating on some relativism or something, that it leaves us pretty lost. So I'd like to save education for another day, and we can dig into that.
All right. Fantastic, Matt. So talk to you again.
Thanks, Doug.